Hello everybody, my name is Max, welcome back to my YouTube channel and another Nottingham Forest match preview. Today we are discussing our upcoming away trip down to London to the Cottage to take on Marco Silva's high-flying Fulham side as we look to distance ourselves further from those relegation spaces. If you're new around these parts, these videos go as following. We start by providing some initial context to the season thus far for our opposition. We then talk a little bit more in detail about some of the stats, the numbers, the key players, all that good data stuff. We then talk about their tactics in a bit of detail, what we can actually expect on the pitch in terms of shape and personnel, followed by a score line prediction. So if you enjoy this kind of stuff, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel whilst you're down there, and let's get talking about Fulham. So as we usually do, we'll be starting by providing some context to the season thus far for Fulham, and it's been a very good return to the Premier League for the Cottagers. At the time of recording, they find themselves in 8th position in the Premier League, having picked up 6 wins from their 15 games following their 3-2 win against us back in September. In fact, in those 15 league games since their win against us at the City Ground, Fulham have picked up 21 league points. Only 7 teams have picked up more in the Premier League since then, which is very impressive when you consider they've had some really tough away trips to the likes of Manchester City and Chelsea during that period. And in terms of that reverse game that I mentioned earlier, it's fair to say we probably deserved something out of that. It was during that very weird period of the season where we suffered back-to-back 3-2 losses against our fellow promotion sides, Fulham and Bournemouth, and much like that Bournemouth game, we definitely deserved something out of it. The stats definitely suggest that. Whilst Fulham generated 14 shots to our 11, expected goals suggest the game should have been a lot closer, and if it wasn't for that 10-minute period in the second half between the 50th and 60th minute, that utter capitulation that we suffered, very similar to the game against Bournemouth, we might have come away with the 3 points, or at least a point from the game, and seen ourselves in a much more comfortable position. So now we have a little bit more context and understanding on the season thus far for Fulham. I think now's a good time for us to switch things around and start looking at the stats and key players, the numbers under the hood, in a little bit more detail for this Fulham side. So in terms of Fulham's attack, they've more or less stayed in the same sort of position that they were in when we played them back in September. At that time, they were 8th on goals scored and they were 11th for expected goals generated. Now they are both 9th for goals scored and expected goals generated. They've more or less flatlined to the 8th, 9th best attack in the league at the moment. And this is despite the fact that their shot volume isn't particularly high. They only take around 11 shots per 90 minutes, which is pretty much more or less the same as this Forest side at the moment. And to me, this suggests a couple of things. Firstly, despite the low volume of shots they take, they get really high quality opportunities. If you look at things like expected goals per shot, they rank fairly highly in the Premier League, and that they're good at getting shots very close to goal. Again, sort of dovetailing off the fact that they get those high quality shots. If we look at things like distance to goal per shot, again, on average, they sit pretty highly in the Premier League, in that upper 50% of Premier League teams. They are definitely very good at getting high quality opportunities, whilst not necessarily the highest volume of opportunities. And when you partner that alongside probably the form front two pairing in the Premier League at the moment, or certainly one of the form front two pairings in the Premier League at the moment, in the form of Alexander Mitrovic and Andreas Pereira, it's little wonder why they're doing so well this season. Mitrovic has 11 goals at the time of recording from around 11.3 expected goals, which is actually showing a slight underperformance on his expected goals. You'd maybe expect him to finish a little bit higher than that, considering the rate and quality of his finishing historically, and he's also taken the 3rd most shots in the Premier League at the time of recording, with only Harry Kane and Erling Haaland having taken more, which I think puts him in pretty esteemed company in terms of Premier League strikers. And his partner in crime, Andreas Pereira, has 2 goals and 5 assists in the Premier League this season, having created the 4th most chances in the Premier League, completed the 4th most crosses, and his dead ball ability being a really huge asset to this team. They are, I believe, the 5th tallest Premier League team on average this season. And again, his ability from dead balls, his ability from crossing is a huge asset to what is a very physically imposing side. But when we flip things over, I'm a little bit more intrigued by this Fulham side when we take a look at their defensive numbers. In terms of goals conceded, they've only conceded the 13th most in the Premier League. This is very run-of-the-mill, very average, very mid-table for what is a very decent Premier League side. Not really much to report on that. So when we look at their expected goals in a little bit more detail, that I'm very confused. They've conceded the most goals in terms of expected goals. They have the highest expected goals against tally in the Premier League this season. And this is not by a small margin. This is by quite a considerable margin to, I believe, Bournemouth, who are in 19th. In fact, they expected goals suggest they should have conceded 12 more goals than they actually have, which is a huge overperformance. If we look at last season, to give you some context, Wolves were the team who overperformed their expected goals against the most in the Premier League last season, and this was by 15 goals over the course of the entire season. Fulham are having a very freakish season defensively. They are by far and away the biggest overperformers in terms of expected goals against and their goals against, and eventually this will catch up on them, but obviously it's doing a very good job at keeping them in that sort of European place hunt at the moment. And I don't think I'm being particularly controversial when I suggest that a big reason as to why Fulham's defence has been as good as it has compared to their expected goals this season is their goalkeeper, the German Bernd Leno. I think a lot of people looked at this deal and were very surprised. It was definitely a coup when they managed to get him out of Arsenal last summer, but I don't think anybody expected him to be performing at the level he has been this season for Fulham. He has genuinely been one of the best goalkeepers in the league for a promotion side. In fact, of the goalkeepers to have played over 1,000 minutes in the Premier League this season, Leno has the third highest save percentage at just under 78% so far this season, and his post-shot expected goals is at 4, meaning his quality of shot stopping has prevented 4 goals for Fulham already this season, which I think is the 3rd or 4th highest in the league this season. And obviously it doesn't sound like a lot, but when it comes to the running, if it was a team looking down the relegation zone, 4 goals would make a huge difference, and it could be the difference between this Fulham side finishing 11th, 10th, 12th in that sort of mid-table position and potentially finishing in European places come the end of this season. Overall, Fulham are a side that can bank on outscoring pretty much most teams in the Premier League at the moment and have enough quality at the back in the form of Bernd Leno, João Palhinha, Anthony Robinson to more or less get themselves over the line in pretty much all of their games. They are overperforming several of their metrics, especially defensively, but you would expect this to level out, and I would imagine at the end of the season they will probably end up finishing in that 10th, 11th, 12th position as Liverpool and Chelsea pick up some form at the back end of the season. But it's definitely worth pointing out they've had a fantastic season thus far. They should be very proud of themselves. Marco Silva's done a fantastic job. And speaking of which, I do actually want to switch things over now to talk about him in a little bit more detail, what he's getting out of this side, and talk about them in a little bit more of a tactical profile style. So we're over on the tactics board. We've got Fulham up in the white, Forest up in the red. I don't want to spend too much time talking about Fulham in too much detail. I feel like I covered that quite a lot in the reverse fixtures match preview, but I do want to give you a basic overview of what Fulham are doing well this season and what's made them so successful. And a big part of that is the core group of players who have played the majority of the minutes for Fulham this season. From back to front, we've got the likes of Bernd Leno in goal, who's having obviously a great season we mentioned earlier. Tim Ream looks like a man redeemed. At centre-back, full-back pairings of Kenny Tete and Anthony Robinson, who are 2 of the form full-backs in the Premier League at the moment. They've definitely been one of the best pairings in the Premier League, certainly this season. A midfield pivot of João Palhinha and Harrison Reed. Harrison Reed maybe being a little bit more licensed to get forward, but both being very solid in that midfield this season. And then attacking front 4 unit of Pereira, Bobby De Cordova-Reid, Willian on the left-hand side who comes inside, and of course Alexander Mitrovic up front. 1 to 11, you could probably name pretty much everybody who's going to play their position in this team, such as the unity and the lack of transition in this team too much from Championship to the Premier League. But of course, a big part of that is the continuity, and they've done a fantastic job with the team that they've got. So when this Fulham team is building out from the back, you'll often see Palhinha coming inside as the pivot player, the de facto pivot player, and often actually Harrison Reed giving a little bit more license to get forward, to get into wide advanced areas, to offer an out ball for players to maybe go long out to, and obviously, like I say, Palhinha being a bit more of the pivot player in that midfield, looking to receive the ball, turn, and get the ball forward into the attacking players. And when we do get the ball into the more attacking areas, we do see the Fulham wide players coming into more central areas, looking to sort of bounce off of Mitrovic's ability to hold up play, bring other forwards into play, sort of link up play. This will often see Bobby Reid and Willian coming into these internal positions. Obviously, Andreas Pereira playing in a much more advanced position as well, with lots of width from the fullbacks. Anthony Robinson especially, he's got a really good motor up and down the left-hand side of that pitch. Defensively, he does this. This does enough defensive work to help this team, but getting forward doesn't necessarily have the numbers to suggest an elite attacking fullback, but his presence, his ability to help stretch defenses by obviously occupying the wide areas, allowing Willian to come inside, is really unquantifiable with numbers. He just does a really good job at getting up and down. His engine's fantastic. I do think he can play a bit above the level of Fulham. I think if you're a Europa League club like a Brighton or maybe a Brentford or something like that, a little bit higher up in the table, not quite your traditional big six clubs, maybe a Newcastle if they were looking for cover a left back, he could probably play at that level. I don't think he could quite yet play at Champions League level, but he's definitely taken a huge step up this season from what we were seeing from him in the Championship over the last couple of seasons. Now, obviously, the biggest strength of this Fulham side is their ability from crossing and from dead ball situations. To put it into some perspective for you, Fulham have completed the 4th most crosses in the Premier League this season, the 5th most shots from free kicks, and have scored the 2nd most headed goals and the most goals from free kicks in the Premier League this season. Their ability in the air is probably, I don't think I'm being particularly controversial. I think they're unbeatable in the air. I think they're one of the best teams in the air in terms of back to front. They've got one of the tallest teams in the Premier League. I think they're unrivaled in terms of their ability in the air, in the attack. Obviously, Mitrovic is a big part of that, but it's a big physical team, and their ability from crossing, the quality that they have from crossing from the likes of Robinson, Pereira, Bobby Reed can put a good ball in, Willian can put a good ball in. It really serves the function of what is quite a direct team, but also a team that gets the most out of the individual players that they have. So defensively, when Fulham lose the ball and they're being transitioned on, they'll go into something closer to a 4-4-2 mid-block. You'll see Pereira quite often coming up alongside Mitrovic to form a more conventional front two shape. Like I say, it's a 4-4-2 mid-block. They don't sit too deep, but they're definitely looking to prevent play from being played through them too easily. And the big advantage of doing what they do in terms of pushing their number 10 up alongside the striker is when teams are building out from the back, it allows them to really cover the pivot player in the midfield. A lot of teams, a lot of modern teams especially, play with a single pivot player. Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal with Thomas Partey, Man United with Casemiro. They've got that singular pivot player who picks up the ball from deep turns and starts the attack. And having a double fronted attack defensively, which sounds really weird, but having a front two defensively allows you to shadow that player, have maybe one go out to press the ball actively, look to press the player on the ball, have one player go alongside the pivot, and it's going to force you to go into wider areas. We talked this quite in depth about this against Leeds last week in the Leeds match preview, so again, check that out in the iCard above if you want to know a bit more about that. It's a very modern way of approaching defensive shapes. It allows you to press well, but it also gives you that solidarity of having the player who can cover the pivot player and prevent play from going through central areas. And Fulham do this really well. They're a fantastic team defensively. So in terms of Nottingham Forest and what we can do to hopefully get something out of this game, what I did was I went back and looked obviously back at that Leeds match, looked back at the highlights, looked back at the key moments. And what I thought was really helpful in combating Leeds' press and how aggressive they were in central areas was having Remo Freuler almost coming in alongside Danilo into what was a bit like a double pivot, a lopsided double pivot. Quite often you'd see them both looking to receive the ball from deep, and that sort of offered us that extra out ball. At times we were quite overwhelmed. You had Harrison, Sinisterra, Nyoto, Bamford all pressing over to the same side of the pitch like this, just sort of move them over, and that quite often left Luke Ayling, the right back, in acres and acres of space on the right hand side for a quick switch, and he had a couple of really good opportunities in the second half to do that. I think what we had in the second half was a bit more structure, a bit more balance. We pushed Nico Williams into that midfield three to offer a little bit more structural support in terms of covering the late runs from the likes of Luke Ayling, but having that double reception from the deep midfield pivot just sort of let us sort of build out from the back a little bit more. We were also very good at getting the ball out through long balls. Obviously, the goal came from a free kick, but that free kick came from us putting the ball into the channel, getting the ball into Brennan Johnson and letting him stretch the defence. And I think this could be a really good example of how we could maybe take on this Fulham team, looking to stretch them, looking to use the forward players that we have. I would suggest that we play Sam Surridge instead of Chris Wood, so we can have that little bit more presence in behind, that stretching of their back line alongside Brennan Johnson up front, and obviously the form Gibbs White's in, the ability he has to find those players and create the chances. I think personally that's the way we should approach this game, maybe having a double pivot in the midfield, maybe looking at having a more mobile strike partnership, and obviously getting Gibbs White into those pockets pockets of space behind Polinia in order to play the ball in behind for the likes of Johnson and Surridge. So in terms of a scoreline for this match, this is maybe one of the more difficult ones in recent weeks for me to predict. Fulham on their day can turn over more or less any team in the Premier League, such as the way that Silva has maximised the output of some pretty middling players, middling Premier League quality players. I do think we will pick something out of this game though. I think the form we've been in, we've only lost one league game since coming back from the World Cup over a month ago. I think it's a great opportunity for us to pick up points on the road, obviously. And I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw, a score draw of some sort. I think we can pick up a point. I think it's going to be very similar to the Bournemouth game where maybe they score early and we're chasing the game for most of the second half. But I think the form we've been in and the quality we have available to us, we should be thinking about picking up a point against a team that, despite how good they've been this season, can be quite porous defensively and can be quite vulnerable to teams stretching them and getting high quality opportunities against them. So I'm going to go for a score draw, 1-1, 2-2, something like that. But obviously, hopefully, we can pick up something away from home. As always, though, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'd be really appreciative to know what you guys think about this game and what you think about Fulham in general. And whilst you're down there, of course, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss these match previews. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the game if you're going down there, Reds. It's a long trip, so hopefully we come back with something after that long journey. And yeah, with that being said, thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.